Good evening. I'll call our council meeting to order at 6 p.m. Hello to colleagues on council. To my far right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett. To my far left, Councillor Novak, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor O'Toole. I'm Mayor McNeil-Smith. Good evening to staff in attendance both in the chamber and to those participating online. And good evening to members of the public, both here in the chamber this evening and to those who may be watching the live webcast. We respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we gather for this meeting is the traditional territory of the Saanich people, which includes the Tsawat Nation, the Sartlip Nation, the Pakwachin Nation, the Sycam Nation, and the Malahat Nation. In turning to approval of the agenda, we have some additional correspondence received since the agenda was published last Thursday, and two requests to move existing agenda items. First, we have two additional letters, one from the McClure family and the second from Kathleen Griffith regarding backyard chickens, and they will be added to the correspondence published with the agenda under item 5B. Second, a written report from Councillor O'Keefe will be added to item 11A under councillor reports. Third, at the request of Councillor Novak, the letter from the Housing Development Associations showing as item 15.1 under correspondence for information will be raised to item 14B under correspondence for discussion. Councillor Duncan has also provided a statement from the CRD website regarding the matter, which will also go under 14B. Fourth, at the request of Councillor Duck, the letter from Jocelyn Gifford and Carl Armstrong showing as item 15.6 under correspondence for information will be raised to item 14C under correspondence for discussion. With those additions and changes, I will seek a mover. Let the agenda be approved as amended.
So moved as the agenda is amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll next turn to our public participation period. This is an opportunity at the beginning of each meeting for members of the public to come forward to the podium to address council on an item on tonight's agenda or on another municipal matter. Members of the public may also address council via Zoom. Those wishing to speak are asked to give their name, their municipality, and if they are representing a group or an organization. After you identify yourself, you'll have a maximum of 4 minutes to speak, and to be fair to all speakers, I will ask you to stop after 4 minutes. I'll now call, our first speaker this evening is participating via Zoom, and I would now like to confirm Mariah O'Brien, if you can confirm your connection via Zoom. Turn to Ms. Nelson.
Hello, Mrs. O'Brien. If you can turn on your sound and your video, please. We can see you as connected. Oh. You've got your mute off, so we can hear you if you want to speak. Maybe we should just give her a few minutes.
Okay, we'll
and come
give
back.
Maria O'Brien a few minutes, and I'll call for a first time if anyone wishing to come forward to speak to council. Good evening. Yeah.
Okay.
You can adjust it as you wish.
As long as you can hear me. Good evening, Mayor McNeil-Smith and Council. My name is Jocelyn Gifford, and I live in Sidney. I represent Roberts Bay Residents Steering Committee, and two other members, Terry Bodson and Mary Chu, are here as well tonight. I'm speaking to item 15.6 on your agenda, and thanks to Councillor Duck for having it raised to allow for discussion. This has been an outstanding issue, as I'm sure you know from our correspondence since May 2021. Council most recently asked for a staff report May 22nd, May 2022. I have photos. I don't know whether there's any way, whether they can be
they were included in our council package.
I have another one from today, which just showing the fence. So many of you may be familiar with that fence in Mermaid Creek, but I do have photos that I took today. Let me just, the response from Ms. Clary indicated that this is an ongoing council action item, but no date provided as to when a response to it could, when a report might be expected. And it discusses contacting regulatory authorities. What we're asking for does not involve any regulatory authorities other than the town of Sidney. It's extending a fence in a Sidney park on Sidney's property. The purpose of extending the fence is to prevent people from going around the fence and into the environmentally sensitive area, which is also extremely hazardous. You've seen the photos of the cracks in the bank and the undercutting. So there's a concern by Roberts Bay residents, and it has been expressed to us by some of the property owners that this is a dangerous area, especially in wet times. And we've also been doing with Peninsula streams a fair amount of invasive species removal and replanting, and of course, people probably without meaning to, but not being aware of the new grasses among the old grasses, are stepping on the new seedlings. So I don't know. The bank is continuing to slough. The space, which used to be an informal path, doesn't go through anymore. It's now blocked at the beach end. But there is the appearance of this path at the park, and we are concerned about that we want to still, since 2021, prevent people from walking there. So I don't think I need to say any more, and I'll thank you for your attention, and should there be any questions, be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward.
Okay.
I'll call for a second time if anyone's wishing to come forward.
Okay, I think I'm connected now.
Oh, Mariah O'Brien, good evening. Thank you for joining us, and I will turn the floor to you for the next 4 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council, and thank you for the opportunity to present my concerns about proposed bylaw number 2266 regarding both the hours public spaces may be used and the fines for infractions. I noticed that your agenda packages have two other responses about this potential bylaw, one favoring its passage and the other opposing it. My position is that I would like to see it delayed for one reason and modified for three. The reason for the delay: any new bylaw which will affect citizens' daily life activities, such as 2266, requires more time than 3 readings in one session for the community to become aware of what the law will change and how it will affect their daily routine. My reasons for asking for modifications is that winter and summer hours should not be the same. In the summer, not being able to use Sidney Park structures until 7 a.m. seems quite unreasonable. When it is hot, many people want to work out before they go to work, school, or otherwise start their day's main activities. Sidney's growing condo population has very little space to exercise outdoors without being in a park. Working out in the summer's late afternoons is not the healthy alternative. Number 2, I walk my dog in a Sidney park most days. Sometimes in the early mornings or after supper, I see a person camping on a bench or beside their bike. They are doing no harm. not causing a disturbance. After all, Sidney is the town closest to two major transportation hubs, the airport and the ferry terminal. It is not at all surprising that some hardy young travelers end up without a place to stay for the night in Sidney. In Sidney, the cost of one night's accommodation is often prohibitive, or space is simply unavailable. I will be very sorry to see these youth being fined by my town. Number 3, for the unhoused population whose presence in Sidney Bandshell likely generated this bylaw, putting these restrictions in place for all park structures for all users seems like overkill, 1, and 2, like putting the cart before the horse, when in Sidney there is no public shelter alternative. Thank you for your attention and listening to my concerns.
Thank you for your remarks this evening.
Good night.
Good night. I'll call for a third and final time. Is there anyone wishing to come forward to address council? Seeing none, I will close our public participation period. We'll now move to section 5, which is bylaws. And the first under item 5A is bylaw number 2262, loan authorization bylaw regarding Parkland acquisition. And we have a report from staff, and I turn to Mr. Hissick for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having received ministry approval confirming that all of our legislative procedures were followed and that we have the required borrowing capacity, this bylaw is ready for adoption. Once adopted, we fully expect to complete the purchase on the closing date of April 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. Council, we have discussed this at previous meetings, but if there are any questions of staff, please indicate. Seeing none, we do have a motion. Councillor Novak.
I'll make the motion that Parkland Acquisition Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2262 be adopted.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Sorry, opposed? I'm sorry. My peripheral vision isn't. Councillor O'Keefe is opposed. The motion does carry. Thank you. We're now turning to 5B, which is bylaw number 2265, Animal Control and Animal License and Control Amendment number 2 bylaw to permit the keeping of backyard hens. I would turn to Mr. Newcomb for an introduction, please.
I believe the introduction will be provided by Ms. Kira.
Ms. Gilmar.
Ms. Gilmar.
Please go ahead, Ms. Gilmar.
So the purpose of this report is to provide council with information and an overview of proposed amendments to the Animal License and Control Bylaw that would permit the keeping of backyard hens in the town of Sidney, as was directed by council in November. This is based on a comprehensive review of the regulatory approaches in other municipalities, and the amendment includes some new definitions, regulations that establish eligible properties, citing and structural regulations for hen enclosures, and regulations related to proper care of hens and maintenance of property. And full details can be found in the staff report and bylaw amendment, but some of the key highlights include maximum of 5 hens with no roosters or chicks permitted, minimum lot size of 550 square meters, and setbacks and various other regulations about hen care. Enforcement is also anticipated to be primarily undertaken by CRD Animal Control. And further details can be found in the report, so I'll leave it there for now, but Coral Henderson from CRD Animal Control is also in attendance tonight to help respond to any questions that council may have.
Thank you, Ms. Gilmar. I'll turn to council if there are any questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. First of all, just thank you to staff for what I think is seems to be a really thorough and well-researched report. It's nice having the info from other municipalities and their best practices, so that was great. I thought the proposed regulations and lot size setbacks and things you proposed and mitigating things to mitigate concerns about noise and smell were good. And I think what you've proposed in terms of the permitting process seems reasonable, where applicants...
Councillor O'Keefe.
Okay, and so my question is, thank you for all of that. I just wanted to say those are the things I I appreciate about the report. So my question was, do you anticipate that you would be preparing some sort of info sheet or handout that would be available on the website for people who are interested if this goes ahead?
Yes, if council were to approve the bylaw amendment tonight, next steps would include having to bring forward an update to the municipal ticketing enforcement bylaw and bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, and then following those adoptions or updates, then we would move forward with a formal process that
Okay.
potential applicants would use.
Right, okay, good. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Gilmar, for your report. Yeah, there's a lot of great information in here, a lot of work put into it. 2 questions. As far as the site plan, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So there'd be a site plan proposed, but we don't actually go to look at it. So we wouldn't know if they actually complied with they could go and build anything they wanted, and we wouldn't know unless a neighbor complained. That would be correct, would it not?
That is correct. It would be a good faith that people would.
Thank you. And my other, and this might be a question for the CRD person who you said was in attendance. So as far as bylaw infractions, so are we talking about a system whereby there would be a warning, or it would be a fine right away, or how would the action take place once there was a bylaw infraction that was acknowledged, I guess is my question.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Coral Henderson from CRD Bylaw and Animal Care Services. Thank you for having me. The answer for enforcement would be what would be in discussion with municipalities. So rolling out any new change in any bylaw, we usually do the educational approach. CRD is compliance driven. So municipal ticketing, especially with chickens, I can tell you that from the other bylaws that we enforce is not very common. It's where someone, say, would refuse to fix their fencing and their chickens keep getting out, where we would maybe put a ticket, but in the end we might issue a ticket, and then once they fix their fence we would just remove the ticket just to get compliance.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Gilmar, for your diligence in getting this done. I know it's a big file. My concerns too center around enforcement, and my big question is in the unusual eventuality where someone simply does not comply with either the structural bylaws or the actual animal bylaws, is there a mechanism to either remove the chickens, remove the coops, or bring the space back to original conditions? I know it's private land, but if we're going to have enforcement, then my question really is, do we have the ability to properly enforce these regulations?
So just for clarification, I understand from staff and previous reports that there's the municipality will enforce with regards to structures, and the CRD, animal control, will enforce with regards to animals. So I invite the CRD representative to address that component, and if staff wish to address the structures component.
As for any situation we dealt with before where someone refuses to comply, it's long form prosecution, and by way of a consent order, which would be an order that they could not keep chickens on their property. This usually goes this way when there's a rooster involved or something like that, where they refuse to remove the rooster. Otherwise, I haven't heard of any precedent being set regarding not allowing to have someone allowed to have chickens on their property at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Just to add to that, from a staff perspective, council can also make a resolution to require a property owner to remove a building from a property. This was done by council several years ago for a different property, different reason, not involving chickens, but that is an option to council as well.
Thank you. Councillor Novak, you had the floor.
Thank you. I'm done, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may, through you to staff, page 3 of the report under rationale for potential regulation, the first sentence there reads, there have been two key changes since the proposed regulations identified in the November staff report. What was the rationale in particular for these two changes? If for starters you can speak to that, please.
Ms. Gilmore?
Yes. So the first one was to permit hens based on the primary use of the property, and so instead of allowing it based on based on zone specifically, that wouldn't, in the draft proposed regulations from November staff report, suggested that it could be, in any single-family residential zone, whereas in the bylaw amendment before you tonight, it is based on single-family dwelling use. So in that case, it could be an R1 property, but if they have a duplex on the property, that is not a single-family dwelling use, it's duplex use. And so this is intended to help mitigate potential civil conflicts on a property between multiple multiple resident households on one property, and also to include single-family homes who are in a zone that might not be just for single-family residents. We have some multifamily zones that currently just have a single-family dwelling on them, so that would permit them to be able to have a chicken coop as long as it is one single-family dwelling on the property. Oh, and the other one was to increase the setbacks from residential windows and doors to mitigate noise concerns from 3 meters to 4.5 meters, so 10 to 15 feet.
Thank you. So to the first change that you noted and reported on, in the context of the minimum parcel size that you've referred to here, 550 square meters, and new provincial legislation, do you envision within that lot size and the parameters you've set here a potential scenario or not where a site could change after having been received permission, and then how, if that assumption is correct that could occur, how would what would trigger a change, I guess, to revoke the permission to raise hens if that scenario I described is accurate or could be accurate?
Thank you. I can speak to that one. So if that happens, say somebody applies to have chickens on their property, they get the chickens, and then they want to change the building on their property from a single family house to a duplex, or as you mentioned, the new legislation would allow 3 or 4 units on most properties in Sidney. So they would have to apply for a building permit to do that. Part of staff's review of the file would show that, okay, they've applied to have chickens and then they have them. So that would be a discussion between staff and the property owner to let them know that as per the bylaw, that they'd no longer be able to have the chickens because they wanted to add more units to the property. And as Ms. Gilmar explained, the reason for bringing in this to the draft bylaw was to minimize those civil conflicts between neighbors on the same property. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Novick, for a second time.
Thank you. Just to follow up to Councillor Rintoul's question, how would, again through to staff, how would this apply in a scenario where a home has the potential for a legal suite, doesn't have the legal suite, but adds the legal suite after the fact where no building permit is required?
Thank you. Building permit is always required to add a secondary suite to a house. If they build a house and if it's a new house and they're building it with a secondary suite in it, that would be noted on the building permit and on the occupancy permit. But I can't think of a situation where a secondary suite could be put in a house without a building permit to make sure that it is safe and meets the building code requirements. So they always require a building permit and an occupancy permit.
So, just to follow up, so in a scenario where a house is built with the suite, but the suite is not occupied at the time that whoever owns the suite takes, whoever owns the home takes it over, and only decides 10 years down the road to have that suite occupied. Would the simple fact that the suite is there and been approved, would that preclude the ability to have chickens even though there's a single family living there?
So, just to clarify, sorry, just backtracking a little bit, a house with a secondary suite is owned by one owner, and that would be permitted to have chickens by the bylaw. If it's a duplex, like 2 different owners, 3 or 4 different owners, then that's where they would not be permitted, because then you've got the different households there. If it's a landlord-tenant relationship, I think the bylaw would allow chickens on that property. The secondary suite is secondary to the principal dwelling unit.
Okay,
So in that case, just to answer the beginning part of your question there, if a building permit is issued for a house with a suite, going by this interpretation which Mr. Newcomb has provided, he's attending on Zoom tonight, he's welcome to jump in at any point. But that's my understanding, is that the chickens would be permitted in a house with a suite. And if an occupancy permit is given to a house that has a suite built into it, it's no business of the town whether that suite is rented out or not. That's not a rental agreement that needs to come to the town for authorization. That's the private business of the property owner. So we don't know if somebody's living in the suite or not unless they share that information with us.
So in summary then.
There he is.
Good
So-
evening, Mr. Newcomb. I don't see your hand raised, but would you like to speak?
I mean, I'll defer to Councillor Novak.
Very good. Thank you
So-
for joining us.
So, thank you. So I'm just trying to get this straight in my mind, what's allowed, what isn't allowed. So in this scenario, anything, even if there are multiple units on a property, as long as it's a landlord-tenant relationship, it's considered single family, and the backyard chickens would be allowed. Is that correct?
Through the mayor to Councillor Novak, no, that's not correct. So what the bylaw amendment says is that the primary use on the property needs to be a single family dwelling, and that's defined in our zoning bylaw. A secondary suite is a secondary use to that main primary dwelling, primary use of single family dwelling. And so where you have a single family home or a single family home with a secondary suite, chickens would be permitted. And those are the only 2 situations. So any other use, a duplex, a triplex, even if they're rental situations where there's a single owner, they wouldn't be permitted in that situation.
Okay, and if you had a scenario, unlikely though it might be, with a detached garage and a coach house above that's rented, and a secondary suite, so you have 3 families living on the property, 2 of whom are tenants, the primary residence is still single family, the chickens would be allowed. That's my understanding of what I've just heard.
Right, so as long as there's a single family dwelling on the property as a primary use, and there's accessory uses, whether those are secondary suites or accessory dwelling units like a coach house, the chickens would be permitted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. This is, I guess, a question through to the CRD, that you said that you've not yet in the region had a situation where chickens were seized from somebody because they remain non-compliant. For context, because we have dogs and cats, and dogs are definitely licensed, how many dogs do we have typically seized in the CRD in an average year, and situations where other types of domestic animals are being seized from properties?
The only time an animal is seized, it's a dog. There's no authority to seize cats. We're seizing a dog because it's dangerous. We can only do that with a court order from a judge, and that has happened once in Sidney in the 20 years that I've worked here. So, yeah.
It's just generally
Generally not very often.
Yeah.
It's just dangerous dogs that are seized. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Garnett? Okay. So if there's no further questions, I have a question on process through to staff. And so the recommendation is to proceed with 3 readings of the bylaw. If we provide those readings, at second reading we would have deliberation. if council is considering whether or not to have further public engagement on this, what would be the appropriate time to, for council to consider that? At deliberation during second reading and providing a motion, or at another time?
At second reading.
At second reading?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. So council, we do have the option of providing first and second reading to have deliberation and give consideration to further engagement if we so wish. Councillor Duck.
I'd like to move the recommendation that the bylaw be given first reading.
Second.
First and second, all in favor? Opposed? Councillor Novick and Councillor Rantoul are opposed. The motion carries.
I'd like to move the second reading.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Discussion, I'll turn to the mover.
I think that this is, that backyard chickens are more common in our municipalities than we think, and I think it's appropriate. I commend the staff in terms of the reporting and the structure they're putting in place to make sure that this is well managed. We have the CRD in terms of enforcement. So I think all in all, I think this is welcome to addition to Sidney for the care and food subsistence in our community, and I would vote in favor of it.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor O'Keefe.
Sure. I think staff did a good job in terms of talking about mitigating some of the issues in terms of setbacks and lot size, that sort of thing. In terms of some of the things that have been brought up, pests, rats seem to be the biggest concern. And I guess, you know, my response to that is, if we're concerned about rats, we should not allow people to have fruit trees in the town of Sidney, you know, because people who don't, who leave their fruit rotting on the ground present opportunity for rats to come in. We should also ban backyard composting, because that also attracts rats, and wood piles and sheds that people don't attend to. So I guess my point is, yeah, rats are here, they're throughout the community, but I don't think we should prohibit people from having chickens just because this might be an issue. We don't do it for anything else, so I think we should allow them for that reason. In terms of smell, health issues and noise, in my neighborhood, I'm more bothered by dogs. I'm surrounded by dogs, loud ones, and you know, I'm not gonna complain. I mean, they're nice dogs, I know them all, but that's just kind of something that you accept when you're living in a neighborhood, that people are gonna have dogs or cats or chickens, and so I don't think chickens are gonna be any noisier than dogs. In terms of nuisance, if they get out, I'm not particularly bothered about that. I'm more concerned about the cats that are continually hopping over my fence and using my garden as a litter box. But we don't prevent people from having cats for that reason. So I think in the scheme of things, these are all issues that can be dealt with, and like the rest of the CRD, I think we should go ahead and do this. In terms of further public engagement, I'm not feeling a need to do more on that for this. I mean, this is something we've talked about. I think it's been for 2, possibly 3 years, and we've had lots of feedback, and I think anybody who had a thought or opinion on that has provided a lot of reasons, both pro and con, so I feel like I have enough information to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. And I hope you'll grant me a little bit of latitude here, sir. As many might remember from when this motion was brought forward in November, my concern was around avian flu and health concerns. I was fortunate enough to have 2 individuals reach out to me from the health professionals in our community, or near community. Took time out of their busy schedules. One was Dr. Mike Benesick, who is the medical health officer for the South Island, for VIHA. He lives in Victoria and has backyard hens. He has no concern about avian flu being transferred to or transmitted to humans. But he did say he didn't consider, and we should give thought to, the spread of the virus to chickens given how the close proximity to the migratory bird sanctuary. that many of the homes which will be allowed to have them are. So that is something that he said we should consider when we make a decision. And really fortunately, I was able to have Dr. Teresa Burns, who's the Chief Veterinary Officer for the province of British Columbia, contact me, and that really shocked me, but it was great that these people reached out because I needed this information. She also reiterated that the spread to humans is probably not likely to happen. There's only been 7 cases worldwide, and they've had mild symptoms. They are monitoring in case the virus mutates, but it's generally not something that is of a bigger concern. But she did also stress that the proximity of the homes that could have it does raise a real probability that some backyard chickens can get avian flu based on their closeness to the bird sanctuary, which confirmed what I also had researched, is that migratory wild birds are how avian flu is spread. And given where we are in proximity, this what makes our community different in the CRD, the compact nature, and so many homes will be close to it, which is something I was concerned about. And it's the H5N1 strain. It's more transmissible and virulent compared to what was there before 2021. This has been post 2021. And it's not just being found on chicken poultry farms, it's being found in backyard situations as well, smaller, with less chickens and less hens. And the thing that was concerning for the doctor was that most likely, because people who get these hens in this environment are not that knowledgeable, they won't know the bird is infected until it's dead, and it will suffer. And then BC protocols provide that once that happens, all your birds have to be euthanized, which leads to another issue in the fact that not every veterinarian can euthanize a chicken or a hen. It's actually a specialized sort of ability for them to do that, and it's costly. The abattoir where you can slaughter them is another option, but also is costly. And this runs into the welfare of the birds in terms of a lot of people get into this but don't realize how much is actually involved. And then what do they do when they decide they don't want to do it anymore? What do they do with the birds when birds stop laying eggs? They reach into the point where SPCA has said we're getting chickens. They're already overburdened with animals. Some people actually let them go into the wild. I don't know why anybody would do that, but that has happened. The other concern was around, and people have spoken to it, but the doctor did mention there will be an increase in rodent population, particularly rats, and whatever problems come along with those, because they're drawn to the chicken food. And the chicken food, you can store it as best you can, but it's still going to be on the ground. I'm sure the chickens don't eat every piece of food. And rats are pretty ingenious at getting to anything in terms of finding it. And yes, there are lots of things that cause rats to come to bring into it, but this is another issue that can happen. I'm just speaking to what I was told. And they naturally carry salmonella. And both doctors did say that you can mitigate that through proper hand hygiene, but they are concerned about small children and people treating them as pets and how that can spread. And that is a concern. She acknowledged in the end that, this is a difficult decision for local elected representatives, and you have to try and balance the needs of the community with everything else. But in the end, she said that from a disease control and public health perspective, she wouldn't recommend it. And so that was a pretty important piece of information for me. We've had lots of input from the community, both for and against, a great staff report with information. I also think of what issues, I think this issue more than any other, and Councillor O'Keefe mentioned dogs, based on what I've heard from people in the community, could cause neighbor against neighbor. And I have a real concern with that. And our system of complaint-based, where people don't want to complain against their neighbors, but they get frustrated, and it builds up anger and resentment to their neighbors. And in the end, we're relying on possibly a warning, things don't get dealt with in a fashion. It does make people get really frustrated. I've heard about it over and over in 6 years of doing this, how bylaws not being enforced like people think they should be. And this one I could see being really problematic, if I'm being completely honest. But at the end of the day, when I weigh all the information, and I'm trying to make the most informed decision I can, and I'm sorry for being lengthy, Mayor, I come back to what the Chief Veterinary Officer said, and that if they would not be comfortable with us going along with this, then I don't see how I can. And I'm alleviated fears about the transmission to humans, but there's just so many aspects of this from a health perspective that I think are troublesome for me. And so I won't support this moving forward, but I do appreciate and respect the opinions and perspectives of other councillors have offered to the point so far, and from the public. Appreciate what you've had to say, but I'm weighing on the side of science here, because I think at the end of the day, the breadth of knowledge and expertise that this particular doctor has far outweighs anything I could have or hear from the community, and even from staff for that matter. So thank you for putting up with my lengthy speech.
No, Councillor Garnett, please don't be concerned with our council procedures bylaw, allow council members the opportunity to
Thank
speak,
you.
and we appreciate your remarks this evening. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan and then Councillor Novick.
Yeah, thank you. I'll vote in favor of this. I don't find it a difficult decision at all. This is something that all the other municipalities in the regional district have. And the research, the mitigations that our staff have put in are very reasonable, very standard, and address basically all of the concerns that people have brought forward that aren't concerns that simply happen because animals and fruit trees exist, and we allow all of those things. I know Councillor Garnett is worried about this becoming a neighbors reporting neighbors and resentment thing, but I can assure you there will be equal amounts of resentment, perhaps more, if this is, it's one thing when it's NIMBYism, it's another when it's NOIBYism, which is not in your backyard, right? So right now we allow dogs to have the full roam of the city, for example. My sister-in-law was once bitten in the face by somebody else's dog, and it punctured her face and scarred her permanently. I know a kid who had his arm broken by somebody else's dog. Or, you know, and we still allow people to have pet dogs because the majority of dogs will not do that. We still allow them off of other people's property. We still don't limit how they are kept in the other owner's backyard. Chickens are limited to the owner's backyard, and they have very stringent regulations about how they are kept there. As Councillor O'Keefe brought up, other people's cats have come into my yard, and now I have to pay hundreds of dollars to build structures around my own vegetable garden to keep those cats from poisoning my vegetables and spreading parasites and other diseases that cats have in their urine and feces to my children before I can eat my food. That's in my yard. But we let cats, and we let other people let their cats do that to me. So I don't know why we would be more restrictive to what somebody is allowed to do in the privacy of their own yard, where we've made reasonable accommodations to ensure that it doesn't affect other people, when we allow that kind of thing to happen to everybody else on public property and in our own yards. It's an unreasonable and unfair double standard, and I think if we were to allow that to sway us, that would cause a lot of resentment. There's also a very clear generational demarcation between those who are speaking for and those who are speaking against, which again becomes this very clear fairness and double standard issue, where we don't prevent senior citizens from having their companion dogs and things that may bite their grandchildren, things that may poop in my backyard, right? But we would somehow prevent families from knowing whether they could have a pet that means their kids have to wash their own hands. I had a red-eared slider. They also carry salmonella for my entire childhood. And we knew you're just supposed to wash your hands when you handle your pet. And I don't think it's our job as a government to be more restrictive about a particular type of animal in one situation than we would be about other things. Let people govern how they manage their own property when we've made reasonable accommodations that it doesn't affect others. And if we're gonna start getting into other people's individual backyards like this, I think that we're gonna have to start looking at the other pets as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Novick, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm afraid that I have to vote against this. Since this first came to council in November, I have had literally dozens of community members come to me and say, I really hope you're not going to vote for backyard chickens. I've also had a few people come to me and say, I really hope you're going to vote for backyard chickens. But on balance, there have been a lot more people who are against this than are for it. That's the first thing. And I feel that my role is to represent the community at large. Secondly, I'm gratified to hear the research that Councillor Garnett has done to bring a little bit of science to this case. A lot of what we've heard is anecdotal. I think I would be in favor of this if property sizes in Sidney were larger. I did a little bit of research and discovered that Sidney is the densest community in the CRD, with the exception of Victoria proper, with all their high rises and all. But we are certainly a lot denser than all of the municipalities around us and on the West Shore. And I think that population density needs to be taken into consideration when we look at backyard hens. I think the impact on neighbors would be considerably greater given the size of lots in Sidney than it would be in, say, Machosen or Langford or Colwood, where lots tend to be larger, likewise in Saanich. I'm not satisfied that our enforcement capability will deal with issues as they arise. Because we're complaint-driven, and as previous speakers have mentioned, there are a lot of people that will simply not bother to register formal complaints, and animosity will breed between neighbors. And I just don't think in a community like Sidney that this is necessary. Larger properties, sure, no problem. Areas without wild bird sanctuaries, sure, no problem. But I think Sidney is unique, and there's a reason that we're the last community to address this. And that reason is the density of our population, the relatively small size of our properties, the close proximity of one neighbor to another, the wild bird sanctuary, which we do need to take into consideration, and our ability to enforce the rules should we go ahead with this. I am in favor of a more structured public consultation where we could get a more quantitative understanding of the will of the community. But I suspect that if we do that, then this bylaw will quickly be defeated. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll go to any first-time speakers before going to second-time speakers. Councillor O'Toole and then myself.
Thank you, Mayor. I greatly appreciate the feedback we've received from the community thus far. There's obviously been a lot of advocacy from supporters, and I appreciate your voice in bringing this forward. And as has been noted, there's also been voices in opposition, and I don't think, to the question of further consultation in that prospect, I don't think we're going to see a productive outcome from that dialogue, other than kind of pitting those voices against one another. And I think we've heard quite loudly from both sides for and against on this item. I think what's changed, at least from my perspective, since November when we first saw this, was the clarity around the new housing legislation. And so I asked the question of staff, if this was kind of viewed through that lens, and we had the answer that yes, staff will be vetting future applications for additional housing on single-family lots to ensure that any existing permits would be noted and addressed. But having said that, with the parameters that are set out in here, some 2,200 properties in Sidney would qualify, would be approved for keeping hens if they meet all of the other parameters. And I do recall a speaker coming forward saying that she was concerned previously that with what was suggested last time, and her property wouldn't be able to accommodate keeping hens. And so this doesn't help that. And part of my concern this evening is really around we're setting up a system here that is gonna have to be meticulously managed. And it becomes something that is not just a requirement from an enforcement standpoint, but also from a staff and procedural standpoint. And that's okay. You know, it would become something that we're all accustomed to, but there is an element to be recognized here to manage this, and you're managing it for a limited number of properties in the community, and that number of properties that is eligible is going to decline, because as you see homeowners looking to build duplexes, triplexes on their properties, and new housing legislation permits that, this number is only going to go down. So I am concerned about the density aspect, currently for our community, and how that changes in the future. I'm unlikely to support the bylaw that's before us, but I continue to listen to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll take a turn and speak to this. First, I want to appreciate the input that we've had from residents over the last 2 or 3 years. I think this first resurfaced with predominantly new council last term, but then rose again during the public engagement during the review of the official community plan. And since that time, residents have come forward making this request because we didn't act at either of those previous times. We did indicate through the review of the official community plan that we would give consideration to backyard chickens, and this is the opportunity for council to do that. I'm supportive of the bylaws as drafted by staff and presented to us. Of the 13 municipalities in Greater Victoria, Sidney is the only municipality that does not permit any backyard chickens. And that in itself caused me to pause and say, why not? And quite frankly, there is that fact, but as well is if in those other 12 municipalities, backyard chickens had caused a problem, a challenge, an ongoing challenge, I think we would have heard about it over time. And quite frankly, I haven't heard of ongoing challenges in other municipalities. I want to thank staff for their measured approach in bringing this bylaw forward. Sidney staff have consulted with the staff in other municipalities, and we have benefited from their experience and their best practices when drafting our bylaw amendments for backyard hens. And so I think we're in the ideal situation that 12 other municipalities in the region have gone through this, and that we're benefiting it. And I think all of the particulars in the bylaw, and I won't go through them all, but there's a permitting process, there's enforcement, and so forth. So I think we're moving forward in a very reasonable fashion, and I ask myself, why not? As staff have indicated in their report, the minimum lot size is ideal in square feet, so is 6,000 square feet, which is kind of a standard 50 by 120 foot lot, or a common lot. And so there are backyard chickens in residential lots of that size in other municipalities. And we learn from that. Staff have indicated that there are 2,200 properties that would meet the single family residence. However, as also indicated in the staff report, there is likely a number of properties within that 2,200 that won't be able to have backyard because they won't be able to provide the setbacks that are necessary within this bylaw. So I'm not particularly concerned about the housing legislation because the bylaw indicates that it would happen on a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. And if that property is subdivided or is put together with other properties for townhouses, as we've seen in our community, then there won't be backyard chickens there. In terms of density, I have to think that, or see that there are parts, certainly of Victoria and parts of Saanich, where they have higher buildings than we do with nearby single-family residences that can have backyard chickens. So I don't think Sidney is unique in terms of our in terms of our density. As an entire community, yes, we are a compact, built-out community, and most of the other municipalities aren't necessarily completely built out. With regards to enforcement concerns, again, I think we would have heard from in fact, the staff have indicated in the staff reports that we've received in consulting with both planning staff and bylaw enforcement staff in other municipalities that this has not led to additional resources being necessary or concerns. And I trust that we have CRD animal control, a bylaw that has a lot of experience, mentioned the experience over 20 years in Sidney, in one case with a dog, in a particular situation. So I have confidence in the bylaw enforcement that we have for all our other bylaws in Sidney and for all the other bylaws that the CRD is responsible for enforcing. With regards to the bird sanctuary, it's an interesting point. A much larger bird sanctuary extends from, I believe, Esquimalt Lagoon all along the coastline up to Saanich. And in all of those municipalities, they allow backyard hens within their bylaws under certain conditions. I'm not saying every residence, I'm saying within their bylaws in terms of lot size and property size. So I think there's experience gained elsewhere. With regards to disease control, I appreciate the information that's been brought forward. Again, if disease control was a challenge in experience with these other municipalities that have had it, I think we would have heard about it from now. And I think just as residents are responsible for the other animals that they keep, the residents that are interested in having backyard hens will take the time to show interest. And yes, there will be some bylaw enforcement, just as there is with most of our other bylaws. There is some enforcement along the way. In terms of for and against, you know, in terms of what we've received, and I thank staff for including the letters that we've received at previous times, going back to 2021, I think it is, or so. We have unique letters from 12 unique individuals. A couple of individuals have submitted letters on more than one occasion over the years, and we have about 12 responses for people who are against. And again, it's not a case of how many are for and how many are against. It's what is the rationale that the individuals are providing who are requesting these bylaw changes, and for the people who are opposed. We did see, and I don't have these, I do, in 2019 that one resident brought a petition with 158 names that were in support of backyard hens. And that was before the particulars of our bylaw were brought forward. And in November of 2022, or October of 23, sorry, young Mr. Bertrand came forward and spoke, I think, quite eloquently for any individual, never mind a younger individual, and provided a petition of 162 names. So again, we know that there is significant request or desire within our community. I think being progressive, having gone through us all going through the pandemic, is every little bit that we can become a little more resilient. And if we're a little more resilient in terms of food, as small as it is with backyard hens and eggs, I think it's a step in the right direction. So I hope I've addressed most of the concerns that were. I think I won't address noise and smell and that sort of thing, because I think they're addressed in the staff reports and by my colleagues who have spoken this evening. And I will support this resolution. I'll turn to colleagues for a second time. If anyone's wishing to speak for a second time, I'll turn to Councillor Duck and Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to echo your comments because they're exactly what I was going to say, that we've addressed all those issues. Staff have done a great job in lot size and density management. CRD's going to be there for enforcement and haven't come with any claims of past problems with this. And as you mentioned, the migratory zone in Victoria is much larger than the one we have here, and they haven't had any problems. It's time. We're last in line, and what we benefit from is, like in any family, the fourth or fifth child benefits from parents that are now trained. So we get to benefit from the fact that our previous municipalities have covered this. They've covered all the issues, and we'll have the best bylaw that covers this, and the staff have done an exemplary job. So I continue to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor, for all your comments. It ticked off a number of things here that I was going to mention. The only other thing I would add is in regard to concerns about health authorities or health provincial veterinarians or who have concerns about this, and it's good to have their input as well in that scientific aspect. However, what I would note is that if this was a significant threat to human and other health, the Centre for Disease Control in BC has the authority to say, thou shalt not have chickens anywhere in municipalities. And they have the authority to do that, and they haven't come forward. And so I would think if there was a significant risk to human and other health, that provincial authorities would tell us we can't do this, and they haven't. So I'm happy to go ahead and support this.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just clarify that through my conversations, that's why they pointed me to Ministry of Agriculture for Plant and Animal Health, because they didn't. BC CDC deals with human, not the animal side of it, and that actually that Dr. Benesic spoke to that as well, that he would relent to the veterinarian's position on terms of avian flu for chickens. And as far as not having any issues in Esquimalt or Victoria, we can't 100% know they haven't, because I don't know if you've spoken to everybody there, but I haven't. And I would also add the word yet, because as what I learned is this particular strain of avian flu has become much more virulent. So there is the potential. They didn't say it was going to happen. They said there is a very good possibility it will at some point. Just hasn't happened yet. And as far as the information that I provided, that wasn't trying to offer any information to try and sway decisions of fellow councillors. I was just trying to explain my individual rationale for the decision that I made and why I came to the final conclusion I did. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you again, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Novick for a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one final comment. The population density of Sidney, the compactness of our community is such that it doesn't compare to any other. I would hate to find out that by allowing backyard chickens, we've opened a can of worms, which creates a situation that is difficult for us to control, difficult for us to manage, and creates problems between neighbors because properties are so close to one another. I, for one, unless I was on a quarter acre or half acre lot, would not want chickens in my neighbor's backyard, and I'm in a much smaller one of those 6,000 foot lots. I couldn't imagine having chickens in my 6,000 foot lot, and I couldn't imagine it in my neighbor's. But again, that's me, and that's my personal feelings. But again, I feel that the population density does make us different from the other communities in the CRD, and we should take that under advisement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Novick, Councillor Rantoul, and Councillor Garnett are opposed. The motion carries.
I'd like to move third reading of bylaw number 2265, animal license and control, amendment number 2.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Novick, Councillor Rantoul, and Councillor Garnett are opposed. The motion carries. This will come back at a future meeting for consideration of adoption of the bylaw. Thank you. Thank you, Council. And thank you to our CRD representative for attending this evening. We greatly appreciate you coming all the way out to Sidney.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
We'll next turn to item 5C, which is bylaw number 2266, Parks Amendment number 8 bylaw, to restrict the overnight use of public structures, picnic shelters, and facilities within Sidney parks. I don't believe we're turning to staff for an introduction. We've given first, second, and third reading at a previous meeting, and we do have a recommendation. Councillor Duck.
I'd like to move the recommendation that the bylaw be adopted, bylaw number 2266, Parks Amendment number 8.
Second.
Second. It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I'm going to continue to support this. My understanding is that the reason we're putting this bylaw in place is not to stop activities in the park, but to manage them better, and more to rambunctious and noisy inhabitants of the parks. But it's interesting to me that in following up with this, I followed up with both staff and the RCMP, and we're doing a phenomenal job in supporting those that are unhoused in our community, and certainly those in the parks. They have a protocol which if anybody is a problem in the park, the police come out and they go through with the CRD, with our staff, our town staff, and work through with that person as best they can in the case of somebody sleeping in a park or something like that. But what we have had problems with are noise in parks, and this is what's been disrupting. And so this, I understand, bylaw will give much more, another tool in the tool chest for staff and RCMP to manage the folks in the park, not to restrict. And I just want to be clear that that's not the case. And I think we've gotten some bad press on this. And I think we do a stand-up job of helping those that are in our community that don't have housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll support this in regards to comments made that we've heard through in the public about concern about people getting up in the morning to go and walk their dog or run in the park. I mean, this is not going to impact those individuals, and that's not what I see this is about. This is a way for staff and bylaw and people to deal with disruptive sort of behavior. So I don't see it being particularly disruptive to our regular citizens that want to go before 7 o'clock to enjoy a park. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favour? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're now turning to 5D, which is bylaw number 2267, bylaw notice enforcement. Bylaw notice enforcement amendment number 1. And we have given first 3 readings to this bylaw at previous meeting, and we have a recommendation. Councillor Dutt.
Yes, I'd like to pass the motion that the bylaw be adopted. Bylaw number 2267, bylaw notice enforcement amendment number 1.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favour? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we have item 5E, bylaw number 2268, municipal ticket information amendment number 2. We have given first, second, and third reading at a previous meeting, and we have a recommendation. Councillor Duck.
Yes, and I would like to move the recommendation that the bylaw be adopted. Bylaw number 2268, municipal ticket information amendment number 2.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favour? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're next turning to adoption of minutes under number 7. I would look for a mover that the minutes from our regular council meeting on January 22nd be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
Any errors, omissions, discussion? Seeing none, all in favour? Motion carries. Thank you. We have no business not completed at a previous meeting or rise and report from in-camera minutes. We'll turn to the mayor's report. We do have the CRD Board highlights from January 10th. In the agenda package, it is for information. Are there any questions or discussion? If not, I will move to our council reports, and the first is going to be a joint councilor's report on the South Island Prosperity Project. We have information from Councillor Duck, our liaison, and Councillor O'Keefe, our alternate. Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to follow up. Last fall, November, we had the Local Leadership Day, which was the first time this event had been held. A unique opportunity because it's not often that municipal representatives get together locally to talk about things that are happening in their community outside of the CRD, and specifically looking at economic development. It was very well attended. There was a great sharing of information. I believe 3 of us were there attending it. And what the purpose of this, I sat on the subcommittee that put this together, was to bring attention to 3 topics that would be manageable within the municipal authorities. And those were vibrant places, local economic opportunities within a regional context, climate and emergency management, and attracting and retaining essential healthcare workers. And the reason these three were chosen were not just abstract, but to give some sort of stepping stone for municipalities to look at how they're working on it, to share information how they're working on this, and move it forward. So it wasn't a one-time, one-hit wonder of doing this little meeting of local leadership, but the idea was to keep these rolling along. And in fact, my colleague, Councillor O'Keefe, attended the next meeting, which was in January, which she'll give some feedback on as to what the next steps are relative to this. And I think it's a great opportunity for information sharing between municipalities on hot topics such as we suggested, with the idea of finding solutions. So it's not about just talking about it and not doing anything, but there will actually be actions moving forward. This will come back to the Rising Economy Conference, which is on March 6th to 8th here in Victoria, where again people will be able to gather along with local businesses and talk about relative economic development, but also looking at these topics as to the next steps. And at this point, I'll turn over to my colleague, Councillor O'Keefe, to give sort of a report on what happened in January.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So just prior to council, I decided to put my comments in writing to share you the burden of listening to me talk about 2 pages of stuff. But what I will highlight is in regards to the session that Councillor Duck mentioned, the 3 areas that were looked at were vibrant places, which related to local economic opportunities within a regional context, climate and emergency management was another one, and then attracting and retaining essential healthcare workers. So what they're doing is looking at the feedback and ideas that came from that. Councillor Duck is on a committee that will come up with solutions and bring that forward in March at the next session. So more details in the handout. In regards to other SIP things, also a page of info on that. I think what's important to highlight is the significant work that SIP and Coast are doing and how that ties into our economic development strategy, especially on the blue economy. So I think it's important to note that they're currently doing a survey of all the ocean and marine businesses on the Pacific coast to find out what their issues are, what needs to be done to support that sector, and that will inform future plans to support the blue economy. SIP is working with the Association of BC Marine Industries to create a profile for the marine sector. I think that was one of the things that's in our ECDEV strategy. Sorry. Coast will also be creating a registry of all ocean and marine businesses, and that will include information on what they do, where they're located, using GIS technology. And once all of this info is gathered and analyzed, we'll have access to their findings as a SIP and a Coast member. Dallas from SIP will be looking at that report in more detail when it comes out, and then looking at what opportunities there are for municipalities like Sidney to tap into that information and build our own local strategy. So advice from SIP and Coast at this time in regards to blue economy strategy is sit back, let them do the heavy lifting and the research, and once that's done, maybe sometime later this year, we can have further discussions with them on next steps for a local strategy. On related news, just with the blue economy, because that's such an important thing to us, I just thought I'd mention that in the last couple weeks, there were 2 Sidney businesses that received funds from the provincial government's BC Marine Strategy Infrastructure Program administered by ABCMI. So Titan Boats is going to receive $500,000 to add 4,800 square feet of manufacturing space that will allow them to nearly double their capacity of what they're doing. Liquid Metal Marine, which makes aluminum boats and does custom fabrication, will receive $163,000 for facility upgrades and workspace expansion, and that will help them to strengthen their capacity to be more competitive. And JR Marine, not Sidney, but just across the road in North Saanich on McDonald Park Road, they'll get $307,000. So just kind of an idea of what's happening out there in the blue economy and the local businesses that are profiting from that sector. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. Thank you for adding to Councillor Duck's report, but also the very positive news in our marine sector in Sidney and close by. I'll turn next to Councillor Duncan with a verbal update from the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee.
Thank you. And thank you for saying the name of the committee for me. That's a long one every time. All
Sometimes
right.
called the Alphabet Committee.
That's right. So at our last meeting in January, we had a presentation from the local Moose Hide campaign. And so I've given every member of our council, we were all given what the little Moose Hide piece is. So it's an Indigenous-led initiative to bring awareness and prevention to violence against women. It's kind of, if a lot of people are familiar with me, like the Red Dress campaign for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And this is a response to it from within the Indigenous community as well to help address men and healthy masculinity and kind of intergenerational trauma that leads to that perpetuation of violence, such as we saw in Carmen, Manitoba this week. The Moose Hide Day is not until May 16th, but in honor of, I guess, the fact that we need to wear it more often and for a longer time, I think some of us will be putting that on sooner. But for the Moose Hide Day itself, there will be events in Victoria, and so if you go to moosehide.ca, you can find their website and see what events are going on in downtown, or you can join online and see the speakers. And so one of the things they also do is they do community champion training sessions, which people can sign up for, and they do K-12 education and workshops, which they always tailor to individual classes and kind of their demographics and where they are. And so far they said they've given out 5 million pins, and every year the uptake doubles. So they're very pleased with how well received this has been. We also received an update from the MIST team, so that's the Mobile Youth Response Team, and we have a letter 15.3 in our agenda addresses that. Again, it's another letter from an individual council. However, the Victoria Family Youth Court has sent letters collectively to the ministers before. It's a team that consists of a councillor and an RCMP officer, and they go and they work through the schools and through the RCMP with at-risk youth. Those who have been recruited by gangs are being targeted for recruitment by gangs. In the Greater Victoria area, they have 160 youth that they currently work with, and they said they can't even really do triage because every single one is high priority. There's no such thing as low priority even to get onto their list anymore because there's so many youth in only one team. So they're hoping to get 2 more teams. It seems that they're getting some movement through the RCMP on getting additional officers, but what they're still hoping for is that there will be some money that arrives from the provincial government to pay for the councillors that become the other half of that team. People who want to hear more from, again, Gord and Mia, who are our MIST team, the Vic PD has a podcast called the True Blue Podcast, and on January 31st, they did a podcast with them about what they do. They said one of the things that they are bittersweet happy about, I guess, is the acknowledgement now from every municipality that gang recruitment and gang activity among our youth occurs in every single municipality, and every single RCMP detachment is now on board with the awareness of the seriousness. I will probably unfortunately have to continue updating on them, but hopefully the next one will be a good update that we've got more MIST teams. And we continue to have in that group, we give out priority grants to different organizations that work with youth, street affected youth and mental health, and we have a surplus of $42,000. So we're hoping that if anybody knows organizations that deal with youth, street affected, gang affected, things like that, send them to us. We will give out grants for their organization to run programs anytime. Thank you.
Thank you for the update, Councillor Duncan. We appreciate it. I'll next turn to Councillor O'Keefe, who has an update, and I'll let you introduce your liaison role.
Sure, this is just an update from ArtSea and what's going on with them. Wanted to start by, they wanted to express their appreciation to town staff once again for helping them out with some maintenance issues at the gallery and also in cleaning out their storage at Iroquois Park. So they're very grateful for the support from town staff. The gallery is currently closed for the month of February for annual maintenance and cleanup and preparing for the following year. But they do have what they call their Art on the Deck program. So they have different artists every 2 weeks displaying their artwork in the windows of the gallery. So you can go in there and take a look. And if you see something you like, the contact information is there to contact the artist if you'd like to buy the art. And apparently it's quite a popular program. The gallery will reopen March 1st. It's fully booked for the whole year with a waiting list and people already asking about 2025. So it's a real big asset for the arts community. They get about 20,000 visitors a year and about 150 artists will display their art at the gallery throughout the year. Sometimes they have more than one artist take on a week at the gallery, so to share the space. They recently got a grant of $10,000 from the Peninsula Co-op, and that will help them to make some improvements inside to their space and get more display sort of things in there. In regards to the grant program that they administer on our behalf, they have made changes to that to make it easier for people to apply. So it used to be that they had 2 intakes during the year, one this time of year and then later in the year. So they've decided to have intake on a ongoing basis. And the reason they did that is they often heard from people that, they missed the deadline just because different people and different arts organizations have a different business cycle. So sometimes their cycles didn't coordinate with the deadline. They're also making available paper application for people who aren't comfortable with an online process, and they'll have a volunteer dedicated to responding to questions that come up about the program. Starting in March 15th until April 15th, the Downtown Art Walk will be on again, and that's in partnership with the SBIA, where the SBIA recruits businesses to show artwork in the windows. In past years, they've had about 40 artists displaying artwork. It's free for ArtSea members, and it's resulted in some really nice long-term relationships between the businesses and the arts community. An ArtSea board member is planning to make a presentation to council, probably, I think in the coming weeks, maybe in March perhaps, when there's after we get through our budget process, but they just wanted to know that they would be coming and talk to you about some other initiatives and allow council the opportunity to ask them any questions you may have. And that's all for me on that.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. We appreciate the update. And I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, who has 2 reports to provide.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be very brief. These are more promotions than they are reports. Just want to, now with regards to Sidney Museum, Lego exhibit is now well underway and has been very well attended. The first week alone saw 1,500 visitors, so that's awesome. Family Day weekend coming up this weekend, and it is the biggest, busiest weekend for the museum. So if you're planning to go, and I hope you are, just be mindful that you may have a bit of a wait. Prepare for that. Maybe bring snacks for the kids. Salish Room at the Pier Hotel will again be hosting the Victoria Lego Users Group, and there will be a number of dioramas there. There will be Lego-themed activities in the museum itself. Businesses and organizations in Sidney have worked in cooperation with the museum and have Lego sets from their collection on display in their windows and storefronts. If you find them, you can put your name and be entered in a draw to win a Lego prize. So walk up and down the streets of Sidney and go into businesses. That's always a good thing anyways. And Master Lego builder Robin Sather is again back this year, and he will be actually in the museum and will be constructing a 6-foot Lego model of local landmarks, the Sidney Pier and the fish market. So that'll be a quite interesting thing to watch and see. So please, all who watch this, however many there are, and people in the audience, please make a point of going to the museum. And with the Shaw Center, for the rest of the councilors, remember that they were here on the 22nd of January. I think maybe you were away, Richard, but they did a presentation. And just wanted to let fellow councilors know that found out on January 30th that they have actually reached their contributed revenue total of $188,000 for the year, fiscal year of 23-24, and they still have 4 months to go. So that's a good thing. Again, and they're hoping that there'll be actually more than that. And they're, as they indicated that night, their income level is looking good as well. So the capital projects they're planning will probably, in all likelihood, go ahead and hopefully they'll actually be able to do a bit more. And if not, then bump up that capital reserve. So both very positive things. And the last thing I'll touch on is the next exhibit, which opens on Saturday, February 24th to the public. It's called Drawing Connections, 40 Years of Art and Hope for the Salish Sea. This will be featuring artwork from Mark Hobson, Bill Adams, Allison Watt, Brittany Penn, Rob Butler, Peggy Frank, Ann Stewart, and Peggy Soden. And I'll just read what they have on their webpage here. It says you can take a visual journey through some of the ecological stories that have shaped this region over the past 40 years. This is quite it'll be quite a great event, and I hope many members of the committee will be attending this. I plan to be. I'm actually quite excited about it. There's an example of one of the artists' work on their webpage. If you want to look at and check it out, I think it'll be quite fantastic. And they were reworking the space when I was there the night of the meeting. Got to take a look, and it's looking like it's going to be pretty fabulous. So, all in all, looking really great. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Well, that concludes our council reports. So we're now turning under item 12 to committee reports, and the first under 12A is the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee. And we are receiving their minutes from the January 25th meeting on our agenda. There's no motion required. The committee did not make any recommendations to council, but I will turn to our liaison if you have any remarks. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I do have a few remarks, just because the SPAC minutes don't always capture all the good little bits that happen there. I think one of the good things that I'm seeing coming out of this committee is with the three municipalities participating, the opportunities for collaboration and learning from each other. And so Central Saanich was there they're doing a review of their parks and trails master plan. So they came to the committee and got a bunch of really good ideas about how to proceed in terms of planning the designs of different aspects of their park. And then they will come back to the committee several more times, they anticipate, when they get down to having more detailed designs for playgrounds, for trails, that sort of thing. And North Saanich was there, and they're also starting to go through that process. So they're talking about tapping into the information that Central Saanich was gathering from that process. And of course, our staff would have access to that information as well and put them a bit further ahead when they go to do this sort of thing. But one suggestion that was made by the committee members was that on the website where they talk about their parks, to have a little video of what's at that park, because I didn't realize this, but people, families who have persons with disabilities, before they want to go anywhere to enjoy a park or the outdoors, they usually go and they have to do a scouting out mission first. So they drive there and they look to see, okay, where is the parking? What is the trails like? Can my kid get into the playground? Are there washrooms there? Are they accessible? All these other things that I would never have even thought about. So just that thing about having a little video on the website so they can click to see what is at this park was a suggestion that they put forward. So I thought that was pretty interesting, a good learning for me. Other things that came up, Access Awareness Week. So Shoal Center's doing that again, May 25th to June 1st, and that's something that the town provides funding for. Shoal mentioned that they're also, in addition to that, doing their annual Seniors Day, which is an open house and trade show that consists of speakers and different organizations in the community to let seniors, families, and their caregivers know what's available. I asked them about a similar event there was a group that came to us several months ago. I think they've submitted a request to Grants and Aid about doing a similar event. And Shoal advised that event is a duplication of what is already that Shoal is going to be doing. And the director of Shoal had met with that organization and explained to them, this is what we're already doing. It is a duplication, but I guess they've decided to go ahead with that anyways. So I just thought that would be of information, good information for council to have as we review that later. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. We'll next turn to item 12B, the Committee of the Whole meeting of February 1st. The minutes are being received for information. That was our first budget meeting for 2024. We had a presentation from Mr. Hissick, our Director of Finance. There were some questions from council, but we will begin deliberations in the following weeks at 2 more meetings. And so now I'm turning to staff reports under 13, and the first under 13A.
Point of order.
Yes, Councillor Duck?
I was wondering if we could take a 5-minute recess at this point?
Yes, we'll have a 5-minute recess to 7:35. Thank you. Okay, we'll reconvene our meeting, and we were just going into staff reports in item 13A, Summergate Village Zoning Bylaw Amendment. We have a report from staff, and I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please. Good evening again, Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you, Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening again. So this report provides an overview of the proposed approach to updating the zoning bylaw in relation to Summergate Village. Summergate Village is a manufactured home park in Sidney's southwest corner. It was built in 1978 and since then has been subject to a land use contract, which, like zoning, regulates uses and structures in the development. In June of 2012, the town adopted a placeholder zone, the R4 zone for Summergate Village, intended to apply once the land use contract expires at the end of June 2024. However, in June of 2023, as part of the zoning bylaw update project, the town hosted an open house with Summergate Village residents to get their thoughts on the zoning and the expiry of the land use contract. The strong preference from that open house, and exhibited in other communications with Summergate Village residents, was to maintain a zone similar to the current land use contract. Accordingly, staff are recommending moving forward with crafting a manufactured home zone for Summergate Village, ultimately to be part of the town zoning bylaw. Staff have further investigated the legislative implications of the proposed approach and are comfortable with the current recommendation. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Newcomb, for the report and all the information provided in it. I just have one question, and it's only because in reviewing Appendix B and the responses from the Summergate residents, there was one thing that kept coming up over and over again, and I don't remember seeing it as part of the R4 zoning, but there was a lot of mention by many residents to the 55 age restriction, them wanting to keep that and maintain that. But I don't remember seeing that anywhere as part of the R4 zone. Can you speak to whether that was, or it's just something that came up through discussion?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Garnett. So the age restriction is part of the strata bylaws of Summergate Village, and the Provincial Strata Property Act provides stratas the option to pass a bylaw that restricts occupancy based on age.
Great. So it was never anything that was intended. Just thought it was odd that it kept coming up as though it was something that I wasn't seeing, but obviously it was some kind of concern they just happened to have. So
yeah, it certainly seemed important to them, but it's not part of the town's bylaws at all.
great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks for the question, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I guess I understand the, the desire from Summergate residents to retain a mobile park sort of designation because they're concerned about the density. But I just want to make sure that we're not in a situation where we're sort of orchestrating something that is contrary to the spirit and intent of the legislation. And so my understanding was, and just if staff could confirm, so as of December 31st, anything where it was single family was going to be subject to this new legislation. And I got the impression that we didn't have the ability to kind of change things after December 31st to kind of get around what was proposed. And I guess I recognize that it's still officially manufactured home park, but we did amend our zoning bylaw currently shows it as R4, and it's in our OCP. And so I know you did additional investigation, and did we get a legal opinion on that, or in terms of whether what we're doing is okay?
I'll turn to staff.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, yeah. I'm not sure, I haven't seen that particular date in the legislation, so I'm not sure what that refers to. We have had multiple discussions on this topic, and some in consultation with the town's solicitors as well.
Okay.
And I think staff is quite comfortable with moving forward on this basis. And
Okay.
yeah, I mean, the legislation is certainly new, and there may be differing interpretations of it, but I think at this point staff is comfortable with the interpretation that we've settled on and moving forward.
Okay, well, I'm set. If we've had a legal opinion on it, that's fine. It just, in the numerous webinars that I sat in on it, the Ministry of Housing staff, encouraged municipalities to get legal opinions if things seemed uncertain. So if we've done that homework, then I'm satisfied with the staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul,
I'm happy to move the recommendation if you're ready.
please go for it.
I'll move that staff proceed with drafting the zoning bylaw to include Summergate Village as a dedicated manufactured home zone with regulations consistent with the current Summergate Village land use contract.
I'll second.
Discussion. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'll just note certainly the feedback from the survey and the engagement the town held with residents certainly seems supportive of this direction. So I'm happy to see us move to the next step. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seconder.
Nothing further to add. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you, and thank you to staff. We're next turning to item 13B, which is a request for street vending license for Beacon Brewing, and I'll turn to staff for an introduction. Mr. Newcomb.
Thank you again. So this report provides an overview of the street vending application for Beacon Brewing, which is a microbrewery business located at 9829 3rd Street. This request is similar in nature to Beacon Brewing's previous request in 2023, when they were permitted to operate a food truck on 6 dates outside their 3rd Street location. Staff understand that each of these days in 2023 were successful and the food trucks operated without any issue. For 2024, Beacon Brewing is requesting 1 additional date for a total of 7 days and proposing a very similar approach to last year. If approved by council, staff will work with the applicant to ensure that the requirements of the town's street vending policy are met. And thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I'll turn to questions if there are any. If there are, Councillor Garnett? I do want to turn to staff.
I'm ready to move the recommendation.
Sure. I'd just like to turn to Ms. Nelson if I would for a moment. Is it okay to go ahead and just move the staff recommendation without reading? Or would you prefer it be read in?
Prefer reading it out, please.
Thank you. I'll turn to our excellent reader, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor, and I have no problem reading it out. I'll move the staff recommendation that Beacon Brewing be granted approval to operate a food truck from public property on 3rd Street immediately adjacent to their business entrance between the hours of 1200 to 1600 on April 21st, 2024, May 26th, 2024, and September 22nd, 2024, between the hours of 1500 to 2000 on the Sunday during Sidney Days in June 2024, the Saturday before the Torque Masters Car Show in August 2024, and October 19th, 2024. And between the hours of 1600 to 2100 on December 31st, 2024, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the applicant meets all requirements of street vending policy DV-010, and 2, that the applicant provide proof of a valid business license with appropriate approvals for all food truck vehicles associated with the business at minimum 2 weeks prior to the approved dates of their operation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I know council strongly supported this last year when it came forward. I was opposed at that time, and the rationale for that, because I'm inclined to not support it again this time, is just simply, I love food trucks. I'm partial to beer. It's a good combination. I think it's an environment. I get the vibrancy piece. I'm just mindful of the brick and mortar businesses. If this were a couple times a year, 2 or 3 times a year, we're up to 7 on this occasion. I just start to be sensitive to that element of our business community, and so that's my only concern. I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Duck.
Thank you. I have similar concerns as Councillor Rentoul. However, I'll likely support this just because it seemed to go okay last year. So if there had been an outcry from, you know, surrounding businesses or other food vendors and saying, hey, this is cutting into my business, why are you doing this? Then I would have more concerns. But because we haven't, I'm inclined to say, okay, well, nobody said anything last year, it seemed to be okay, so I feel supportive of it at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Duck?
Yeah, I'm going to support this recommendation and motion because for 359 other days of the year, they use a local vendor for food supplies, and that's Mariner Pizza, which they bring in on a regular basis. So they are supporting other brick and mortar establishments. This is on 7 occasions where they don't have the capacity to meet the need and demand that they have on that particular day. So I think it's a great idea. I think it does bring more vibrancy to town. It will bring more people eating food at other restaurants as well, because there'll be a crowd there and they just got to go somewhere else. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, and I would just like to add to Councillor Duck's statement that what I have heard when I go to the SBIA meetings as the liaison is that for a town of our size, we are under-restauranted. And so one of the things we're always looking for is having more restaurants move into town, and so these food trucks are actually kind of filling a space that we are looking for. We do hear from a lot of other brick and mortar restaurants trying to find suitable space in our town, but as we all know, commercial space is also limited. So this does help in the ways they're saying, and our business community speaks to each other, and it's evident in their letter that they have tried to meet that balance between trying to serve something that keeps our community vibrant while not stepping on the toes of the surrounding businesses. As we'll note, both of our microbreweries are in fact right next to each other and have spoken to each other and arranged things in such a way that they complement each other's business as well, and they're far more direct competitors. So I'm not concerned that this will step on anyone's toes. I go out to eat all the time and our restaurants are still packed, and Sundays is definitely the day that this would be a less of a competition. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Duncan. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favour? Opposed? Councillor Rentoul is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We're turning to item 13C, which is the CRD Saanich Peninsula Liquid Waste Management Plan Audit. We have a report for information. I'll turn to Ms. Clary for an introduction, please.
Good evening. This is an outstanding council action item from 2022 about a CRD audit that was completed in 2019. The town, in this audit, the town had 2 deficient items or non-complete items. So this report outlines what we have done to address them, and we'll continue to work with CRD staff moving forward to make sure we're compliant with the liquid waste management plan. I'm here if you have any questions.
Thanks, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. If not, we do have a recommendation. Or sorry, no, there is no recommendation. It was for information. Councillor O'Keefe.
Just one question. I was wondering where we were in terms of the annual inspection program. So we aim to inspect 20%. I'm just wondering what % of our lines have been inspected. Have we done most of them, or we still have a ways to go?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, I believe we're on the 5th year this coming year, and the contract is currently out to tender right now. So I believe after this year we will have the whole town, the first full 5-year cycle complete.
Oh, okay.
And we'll continue on after that. Yeah.
And so it's like an ongoing sort of thing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further questions on that item, we'll turn to 13D, which is a grant application for emergency support services. I'll turn to Chief Mickelson for an introduction, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Staff are seeking Council support for a UBCM grant application that, if successful, will provide additional funding for our emergency support services team. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions from Council? Seeing none, we do have a recommendation. Councillor Duck.
I'll move the recommendation that staff proceed with the Community Emergency Services Grant application for emergency support services equipment to enhance offsite responses in reception centers and support volunteer recruitment and retention incentives.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Nothing
Any
to
other
add.
discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. We will turn to item 13E, which is World Oceans Day on June 2nd and the Salish Sea Lantern Festival, August 24th. And we have a recommendation. Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll move the recommendation that the Shaw Centre for the Salish Sea World Oceans Day event on June 2nd, 2024 at Beacon Park and Glass Beach, including the use of amplification, be approved, and that the ArtSea Community Arts Council Salish Sea Lantern Festival event on August 24th, 2024 at Beacon Park, Bevan, Fishing Pier and Eastview Park, including the use of amplification, be approved.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous, covering both. Thank you. And we're turning to item 13F, the 2024 Bazan Bay 5K running road race, and we have a recommendation. Councillor Garnett.
I'll take on all the long ones tonight. I'll move that Team West Coast Running and Triathlon Society, the club, be granted permission to use sound amplification and close roads as per approved traffic plan between the hours of 10:45 a.m. to 12 noon on Sunday, April 14th, 2024, for the purpose of hosting the 2024 Synergy Health Bazan Bay 5-kilometer road race in Sidney, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the club provides the town with proof of $5 million minimum liability insurance indemnifying the town of Sidney of any liability. 2, that the club receives written permission from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to use the routes within the ministry's jurisdiction and provides a copy of the approval to the town. 3, that the club notifies all residents and businesses along the race route 2 weeks in advance and provides a copy of the notification and confirmation of delivery to the town. 4, that the club notifies BC Transit, the Sidney Fire Department, and the BC Ambulance Service of the event, and the club complies with any requirements they may have. 5, that the club receives written permission from the RCMP, including approval of the traffic management plan, and provide a copy of this approval to the town and the club to pay any fees or costs levied by the RCMP. 6, that no costs are to be incurred either directly or indirectly by the town for this event. And 7, that the club work with the town to provide and maintain temporary toilet facilities for this event, the number and locations of these facilities to be approved by the town's manager of engineering.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. It's moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we're now turning to our 3 items under correspondence. The first is under 14A, which is the Victoria Airport Authority's 2023 report to nominators. It is a report for information. There's no recommendation. Is there any discussion or comments from colleagues on council? If not, we appreciate receiving that on our agenda. And we'll turn to the next item, which was raised from correspondence for information, and it is the letter from the 4 housing development associations speaking to the CRD Regional Water Supply Master Plan and proposed process with regards to new DCCs. Councillor Novick, you raised this, so I'll turn to you to speak to it, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, I just wanted to add that we did receive the additional letter. Thank you, Councillor Duncan, for providing that information from the CRD.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having read this letter, it just gave me some pause. It gave me more questions than answers. And all I really want to do is refer this to our representatives on the CRD and Regional Water Commission, Mayor and Councillor Duncan, to see if a response would be forthcoming from the CRD to this report.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll turn to our CRD Regional Water Commission representative, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, so this report came, I guess we would have got it at the January 17th meeting. This organization was, I believe, registered to speak as a delegation on January 17th. And if they had this, the date on this is January 10th. So the link to the response letter I sent, they had already sent a summary of this information in November and their main points. This is a much larger report now. And so I believe that the next meeting will have a number of delegations. It would not surprise me if they were one of them, or that they will try to come to another meeting. And I know there will be much more discussion, probably at the commission being brought forward. You know, every municipality got copies of this letter. Other municipalities are discussing this as well. Other commissioners are bringing forward questions. So it's likely there will be another response. I mean, I don't know in what capacity, because I know part of the reason they are sending this now is that there are the regular, you know, consultation, communication that goes out is kind of being responded to, and so the CRD will be responding to, we will be responding to it partly as, you know, how we do our business and how we will now, you know, evaluate and internalize the comments, and see how they are affecting things. And I'm sure the staff will have conversations with those developer community in the same way that our staff would have communications with the developer community about changes that would affect them. So yeah, they'll be responding in a number of ways. We haven't been told specifically that the chair is going to be writing another letter the way they did for the November 23rd one. Specifically in response to this, we may be waiting for more information because we know that there's delegations coming forward. We may be waiting for additional motions from other commissioners that people have wanted to discuss before. And so when that comes forward, I'm not sure, but if they do end up being a delegation for the next meeting, I'll definitely bring that information back to this council. But I know from like my own personal take on this was that the input from this organization is coming forward kind of on the timeline we would expect to be incorporating that. Their feedback is on a lot of the issues with the 30-year plan, which of course come forward in bits and pieces in rolling 5-year plans. And so we have additional opportunities as we go forward to actually look at specific items. So I'm hoping that this won't be something that would be dealt with all at once, and we'll have multiple opportunities to go back and forth with this in our business.
No, thank you, Councillor Duncan. I don't really have much to add. I appreciate that update, and I think as Councillor Duncan ended, that you know, it is a large capital plan over the next 30 years, but it will unfold in a series of projects, and many of those projects will have to come forward to the respective water commissions and CRD Board. And on the part of DCCs, we did have the presentation, and we understand the follow-up to that is, you know, the CRD, like any other local government, has to follow a fairly stringent process to review or initiate DCCs. And the CRD is in a 2-year process, and there will be further approval processes with regards to those DCCs and opportunities for further input. I thank Councillor Duncan for being willing to bring forward an update should they receive a delegation at the next CRD meeting back to Council. Councillor Novak, I'll turn back to you.
Thank you. That's sufficient for now. As long as there is some response, because the report, if read in its entirety, is quite detailed. It's quite complex, and it's also damning. But again, you know, maybe we're reading it as this correspondence might be out of context. We don't have the full context of the master plan, and I don't know if it's something that needs further attention, but I did want to bring it up to council because I felt it was a little bit too important to just accept as correspondence for information. So this satisfies me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett. Sorry, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, and thank you. It's actually, I'm glad that you raised that. It was raised by a councillor who wasn't me. As the lone, you know, commissioner from our municipality, it's always something trying to balance, you know, my own personal, you know, decision about how I would vote as Sarah Duncan on an issue, For the record, I was also critical and agreed with many of the points in this when we last had this vote on the 30-year plan. It was Commissioner Ben Isaac and myself who voted against it, for many of the well laid out reasons that they said. However, that was my personal opinion, and so being able to go forward, having the input to make sure that I am representing the town of Sidney as a commissioner there will probably have increasing importance, and so hearing from my colleagues on their take on that will be increasingly important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Duncan, as well, for the information you provided here, and thank you for Councillor Rowe for I was also going to raise it, and you beat me to the punch. And thank you, Mayor, for explaining. I was kind of curious as to where we were in the process and how it's going to go forward, but I'm also curious as to whether, at this point in time, has the provincial government weighed in on this? And I say that in the context of they're rolling out all these housing announcements, and to build houses, build more of them, build them faster, and this water DCC, if it comes through based on the information they provided at their meeting, seems almost to counteract some of what the legislation is. So I was curious to hear if at some point, if either of you had heard whether the province has weighed in any way or form yet.
Well, thank you for the question. The province has very, stringent regulation in terms of, requiring a regional water supply master plan, but also with the process of creating a new DCC. And so, yes, the province will have an opportunity to review it at the appropriate time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, and thank you to the councillors for bringing this forward. There's always also something of interest to me, and thank you to Councillor Duncan for her response. And I would be interested in hearing more, like when it comes up again. Just FYI, I'd be interested to hear what happens next and what your reservations are as well, in terms of someone who is really plugged into this stuff and knows what's going on. When the CRD came and did the presentation on the DCCs for our water infrastructure, I had lots of concerns about that. So I'm interested in hearing more about this and having maybe further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. And I'll just turn to Councillor Duncan if you can remind us what the date of the Regional Water Commission meeting is in February.
I'm trying to think of what the date is. It's always the third Wednesday. Yeah.
In the late morning, isn't it?
From 11:30 to 1:30, and it is live streamed.
Yeah, I was just going to mention the meeting is live web streamed. Their agendas are available, and that's certainly a source of information. I think the governance is robust in terms of having the Regional Water Commission with representatives from all the municipalities and regional districts, and then you have the 24-member CRD board that reviews those recommendations from the Commission. See if there's any further comment from colleagues. Seeing none, thank you again for raising and discussing that, Council. And we'll turn to the next, and that was the letter from Jocelyn Gifford and Kyle Armstrong being raised by Councillor Duck with regards to Mermaid Creek. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think this is important to discuss this. I know staff are working on and evaluating plans on what to do here, but in contacting staff prior to this meeting, I was asking about liability and safety because that's going to be in evidence quite a bit. Partly and parcel because of the great work that the volunteers have done from Peninsula Streams in Roberts Bay in clearing all the invasives there. It is much easier to walk down that way now. That being said, that walking along the edge of that is sloughing away the bank even more and causing even more erosion on Mermaid Creek, and imposing on the landowners there to kind of monitor their land. The town doesn't have any liability relative to risk or anything there, so there's nothing we can do officially, and there are obviously some safety issues with people transferring from there to the water. My point is that I think we should look at permanently closing this. I know the staff are looking at plans and what to do there, but given the work that Peninsula Streams is doing and Roberts Bay volunteering to do, there's no reason why this needs to be open. There's very proximate road access that allows people to walk through Mermaid Park and right down level and straight on to Fifth and to the beach. So it's not any difference in walking distance, and much more easily maintained terrain. If we do close access to this, I think it will provide an opportunity for this area to regenerate and be regenerated through the work of Peninsula streams. Quite often, we all go hiking, and you see those sort of trails that have been cut through a forest arbitrarily, and you know, the caretakers of the forest, whether it be First Nations or CRD, will pile branches and that sort of thing to block the access to that trail. So I think there are ways to quickly block the access to this and move towards permanent limitations on human traffic going down the side of Mermaid Creek. So I'd like to hear what my colleagues have got to say, and I may have a motion arising. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Councillor Duncan, raising this. I would just ask Council that while we're having some deliberation about a particular course of action, I think we should have a motion on the floor. If we're going to consider that, I would turn to Council first if they have any questions in the process, and I actually have a question. I might proceed with staff and then turn to councillors. So my first question is, in the staff response by Ms. Clary to the original letter, it reminds us of the motion that council passed on a request to close previous request to close Mermaid Creek, is that that staff report back on the feasibility and cost of fencing off access to the path. And I might turn to staff if they could comment on some of the points of consideration for staff with regards to feasibility. Hello, Ms. Clary.
Good evening again. So yes, staff have reached out to both federal and provincial ministries regarding this. It appears that we likely can install a fence at the water side of the path. It's just we would need to hire an environmental professional to provide guidance on that work. I know Ms. Gifford earlier said we just need the fence at the park side. However, although it's not a groomed trail, it's not something that the town maintains. There are obviously people and creatures who do use it coming up from the water, and installing just the fence at the park side may create more vandalism there. We've already installed signs and they've consistently been vandalized in this location. But it is feasible. It does sound like it's feasible. We did get the recommendation to just plant along the trail to discourage the use of it. So that would be something we'd want to look into. There are, it appears, homeowners who back onto this trail who do groom it closer to the water. So we'd have to decide what to do with those, with that area. And, you know, are we going to maintain this as a private beach access, or are we actually going to close the trail? So those are kind of all things that need to go into this decision. And we are working on a staff report to bring back so that council has a full picture of what they'd be looking at for this.
Thanks, Ms. Clary. If I may follow up, we know that Peninsula Streams has presented to council with regards to a very significant project. We understand that they're still awaiting approvals from external agencies. Can you speak to, or staff speak to, the implications of perhaps waiting for further details on that project before making a determination on the path? What is the staff's view with regards to that project and making a decision on the path?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess from staff's perspective, we don't know what this area will look like in the fall even. Like it may change quite significantly with the work that Peninsula Streams is doing in there. I know one of their renderings showed a bridge, which I know they're not intending to do a bridge, but is there going to be some sort of crossing of the creek after this work is done? Not a formal bridge crossing, but what will be there? It's really hard, I guess, for us to confidently go and spend resources in this location where there is that big unknown at this time.
Thank you. Two more questions. One is with regards to the residents that back on to that pathway, and is the town permitted to prohibit egress from their rear yards into this area? Is that still something to be investigated?
That is something we would want to look into to understand. It is foreshore, so we would want to be working with the province on whatever we do in this location. Yeah, we would have to get a legal opinion really if those property owners did want to maintain this access that we were looking to close.
Okay, and my last question before turning to others is with regards to the request to put a fence up from the park side. We appreciate that, with changing circumstances, the viability of access from the water side is changes. But do staff have concerns, or is that something still to be reviewed in terms of what the access would or would not be from the water side of that trail?
So, not that there's necessarily concerns, it's just that there's a high risk that it will be vandalized. Like if we do just go put snow fence up or something like that, there, just based on the activity we've seen with the signage along the path, there's a high likelihood that people will continue to use it. I have heard anecdotally that during as tides start to come in, some people will cut up that location because they can't cross the creek at that point, so they can't actually get to that Fifth Street access. So like someone who's doing that, and then they kind of get stranded up this path that we've now put a permanent fence over, it would just be safer to close both ends at the same time and make the path just inaccessible.
Thank you. Sorry, I do have one last question. That is with regards to timeline, appreciating that the project is still not approved by external authorities for Mermaid Creek and the other considerations you've mentioned. Can you provide a timeline, a rough timeline or estimated timeline? We appreciate if you cannot for this coming back to council.
We're working on a report now. I'd say in the next few weeks we'd be bringing back a report on the feasibility of the fence. As far as Peninsula Streams project goes, that may impact the fence. Sorry.
No, I understand. No. Sorry, go ahead if you wish. Thanks very much. Thank you for taking my questions. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to Councillor Duck for raising this. There's another one that I was going to raise. And I just want to thank Ms. Gifford and Roberts Bay residents for being such good advocates for this environmental area. I just have one question when it ties into both what Councillor Duck and the Mayor had mentioned. And it involves around the Salt Marsh Restoration Project that's to be done by PSS at some point in the future. And I'm wondering if staff could weigh in on once that's completed, if we didn't do something here, is there the possibility that there could be negative, either direct or indirect impacts on that restoration project by the continued degradation of this path into the creek?
Through to Councillor Garnett, we'd have to get an environmental professional to provide input on that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Garnett. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mayor, and feel free to hold this for your future response. It might be an unfair inquiry at this moment, but you mentioned the foreshore and the provincial and federal authorities, which I believe the foreshore goes to the high tide mark. So I take it we're talking about access in a large amount that doesn't even relate to town of Sidney property, and depending on where that high tide mark is in comparison to the culvert where water is entering the more traditional element of the stream, whether or not we have the ability to fence it off without those provincial and federal authorities. And so I know there was some suggestion, I think at some point in correspondence or either this evening about those permissions from other levels of government, but I take it in the staff response, perhaps you can address that, that permission that may be required given the high tide mark and what defaults to the Crown and where it defaults to the Crown. Thank you.
Ms. Clary?
Thank you. Through to Councillor Rintoul, the staff did reach out to both the ministry, provincial ministry, and Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and also the Environment Canada with respect to the migratory bird sanctuary. We did get different answers from everybody, but really, I think we will have to make sure we're working with an environmental professional who understands the rules. It does seem like those ministries are, for small projects, they're not necessarily requesting the same level of review that they have in the past, but we still need to make sure that we're doing work according to best management practices, which town staff don't have the internal specialization, I'll say, to do on our own. So we would have to work with a third party, but our understanding based on the feedback we got, we would be permitted to install a fence and do some additional planting as long as we're following all the regulations, which again, staff internally don't have the expertise to do on our own. So we would need to hire a third party to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Are there any other questions? If not, I'll turn back to Councillor Duck, who raised the matter.
I think, well, my knowledge is that we already have a motion there for staff to move towards this. I'd just like to put a motion forward that I've submitted that council directs staff to permanently close public access to Mermaid Creek from Mermaid Park. I did originally have from the beach outflow point of Mermaid Creek into Roberts Bay, but I don't think we have control over that point. So I don't think we're at any point, so that's my motion. I'll stop there.
Do we have a seconder?
Second for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded. Go ahead, Councillor Duck.
So the intent here is I don't think we're ever going to see public using any pathway of any sort down Mermaid Creek to the water. That's crossing public or private land, and also very disturbing to that land that they're crossing. So I don't see any reason why we can't move ahead with permanently closing that, subject to consultation with the authorities that Ms. Clary pointed out. But we should start looking at that right now. And whatever happens with Mermaid Creek, whatever Peninsula Streams does there, won't require a public access path to the water. And we might as well start that process now by closing any access to that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for council's information, the only Mermaid Creek related budget that we have in the draft plan is currently for support for Peninsula Streams, the Peninsula Streams project. If council does resolve to move this motion forward, consideration would likely have to be given to allocating an appropriate budget. We don't know what the cost is at this point, and that's something that I believe Ms. Clary would be reporting out on with respect to a future report. So just wanted to clarify that for council.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. So I take that we might need to amend the motion to, if this motion proceeds, to amend the motion to request a budget allocation in 2024 or at such time. I mean, if this motion is just passed, staff are going to have to come back with the costing. So I guess I'm seeking staff direction. Mr. Hissick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps the question could be asked if Peninsula Streams is willing to forego some of their funding for this initiative instead. We still have not finalized our funding agreement with them, and we're still trying to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad for Mr. Hissick's suggestion there. I was going to say one of the biggest issues clearly we've had here with ecological restoration, and we have in general, is usually keeping people out first so that even this area could probably recover a lot faster without them having to spend the money on planting the way they already did, and some of the structures they put in the way they already did, if we'd been able to keep people out and make them respect this area before we'd had to go to that. And so I think they may very well be amenable to, if this spending a bit of this money on actually preventing the damage in the first place and allowing the ecosystem to recover itself would be overall in the end cost-saving measure for them.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I was initially leaning towards not supporting the motion, only because I was anticipating that, oh, staff are going to be coming forward with a report soon, and we can see what the big picture is, and look at putting the fence at the park and at the seashore as well. But realizing that, okay, if the report is coming after budget time, and then there's no budget, and then we're going to have to wait for another year or more in order to do something. So that's a concern. In terms of getting money out of the group that's doing the program, I guess I have no concept of whether that's a realistic outcome or not. I don't know. So I guess what I'm saying is, if we're asking to go to them to help fund this, okay, that's what I was misunderstanding.
So for clarity, it was that rather than us giving them the money for the other things, we would use that money that we would normally give them. Yeah, sorry, forgo it was our understanding.
Yeah. Okay, yes. Okay, that makes sense. I would support that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I comment, could I just ask Councillor Duck to repeat his motion so I can be sure of exactly what the ask is?
Certainly.
Or
I
perhaps
can turn to Ms. Clary, turn to Ms.
Ms.
Nelson.
Nelson might have it.
That council directs staff to permanently close public access to Mermaid Creek from Mermaid Park.
Thank you. So if, in reading Ms. Clary's response to all this, it says quite clearly that on the council meeting of May 24th, 2022, council already carried a resolution to close Mermaid Creek Path. Is that not the same thing that you're asking, or is there something I'm missing?
Sorry, for clarification, Councillor, the motion was that staff report back on the feasibility and cost of fencing off access to the path. That's the actual wording.
Yes, I'm sorry, you're absolutely correct. But to my knowledge, we haven't received that report yet, and I think if what Ms. Clary says is correct, we're still waiting for some expertise on that? Environmental expertise?
I understood from Ms. Clary that they're waiting for expertise, and in terms of a rough timeline, it could be in the coming weeks or months.
Then my question simply remains, why are we making another motion on this when it's already underway?
Okay, thank you for the question. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
The intent of the motion is that we're going to permanently close any access to that. So why are we waiting for any reports? We should be progressing forward to close it and make sure that there's nothing that's going to inhibit us. We're not going to looking for public access on that creek at any time in the future. As is pointed out by my colleague, Councillor Duncan, it will allow for the rehabilitation to take active steps in moving forward. It'll provide an opportunity for that area to regenerate on its own with the help of Peninsula streams. And there's no need for us to wait any further that for a report that's just saying we're going to close it. Thank you.
I'm going to turn to Councillor O'Toole for first time, myself for first time. I asked questions, but I haven't spoken to the motion, and then turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm inclined, excuse me, to see the original request fulfilled around the feasibility, and in part because of the response Ms. Clary gave us this evening about the discussion on the water side as well, the water side access. It's one thing to close access from the Parkland, that's another to close it from the water side, because you potentially still have traffic if it's people out wandering and walking along the side of the creek, and then have to do a U-turn to go back down to Roberts Bay to find another access and egress point. So I appreciate the nature of the request, in particular the comments from Councillor Duck and Councillor Duncan around how important it is to keep people from not trotting in this space in relation to erosion in particular. The town has certainly made efforts, and we've had this discussion previously, as was noted by Ms. Gifford this evening in her presentation, without much success in deterring people from using the path. But I would like us to, I think, consider this holistically in terms of the feasibility element, and not see us, march off and throw up a wall and hope that it sticks. So I'd rather see this in a more fulsome response from staff, and I think that was the original intent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. My comments are very much aligned with Councillor Rintoul's. I think we've heard from staff that there is a process and next steps. There is an intention in a reasonable period of time for this come back to council to consider both the feasibility and the costs. I do appreciate the point mentioned earlier that we have begun our budget process and that sort of thing. I mean, there are things that we can do depending on the prioritization that we place on this with regards to addressing the costs when it comes back to council. I don't know that it's helpful to try and rush this into the budget process. I think we can still proceed in a reasonable fashion as we've heard from staff this evening. I had next Councillor Duncan.
Oh, thank you. I think I wasn't sure if the answer that was given to Councillor Novak before about how this motion differed from the original one was sufficient, but I think it was the difference was that this motion speaks only to the upper fencing, which we did not require any more input from other regulatory bodies on, because that was Town of Sidney, whereas the original motion was speaking about feasibility and cost and having to speak to outside agencies, primarily because of the water side. So that was why this one would be different at this time. That was all.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duck for a third time.
Thank you. Just to be clear, do we have any intention, maybe this is a question through to staff, of ever having a pathway down that side? Because what we're saying here is that we're waiting for a report to come back, which is then going to require budget, which then is not going to be available till next year to do this, that we'll have that access open for another year of use and further plant damage there. So do we have an intention of not fencing this off at some point and providing that access? Because what I'm suggesting in my motion is that we close it off. It's going to be closed off, I would think, at some point, and even when the staff report comes forward. I can't imagine it's not going to be. So why are we not moving forward with that and looking at the potential of either contacting Peninsula Streams to fund it, or part of our funding can go towards that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm presuming that most of the people that use that path are in the residential area around Mermaid Creek, and that they sort of cut down there to go to the water and then they come back again. So I don't envision that there would be people down in the Roberts in that area and wanting to come up that path to Mermaid Creek. So it seems to me that having that stopping, that gate or that fence right in Mermaid Creek would pretty well take care of the traffic on that. And so I'm not too bothered about whether there's a fence at the water side, because once people know that they can't get down there, they're not going to go there and come back again. I guess, and the other thing that kind of resonated with me is Ms. Gifford mentioning that they've tried to they've done replanting on that path to try and inhibit people from using that path, but they haven't been very successful because people are trampling on those seedlings. So it seems a good idea to just block it off now and be done with it. How we pay for it, it is the other thing, but I leaning towards supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor O'Toole and myself are opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. So just to confirm with that motion, to confirm back to staff that staff will still bring forward a report on that process. Thank you. Okay, that concludes our correspondence. Under 15, we have other items of correspondence for information. They are received by virtue of being on our agenda this evening. We're not discussing them further. We appreciate receiving that correspondence. We have no notices of motion or motion to go in camera this evening. I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, Council. Thank you, staff. Thank you, members of the public.